My name is Maligiaq Johnsen Padilla. I want to show some of this kayak paddle techniques I learned from my grandfather Peter Johnsen and from Kayak Club. Beginning paddles. Take the paddle next to the white part of the paddle. Use flat angle, put in the water and look straight, don't look the sides. The mat can cause for capsize. Just watch me. And if you paddle don't need to be too high and too low, about in the middle. And if you put the water all the way from the back, it makes more power and easier to stroke. If you're good enough, you can use any degree what you want the best for you. But my grandfather told me this way about 40-degree angle, put in water, because it's easy to take off from water. Same thing all the way from the back. It makes more speed and distance. This paddle is a short paddle they use for sliding paddle, mostly used for storm and windy. Because using for slide, like I showed just a second. And if you want to paddle with this, use same angle about 40-degree, but your body leaning forward, so when don't need to hit your body. Same thing you paddle, make sliding. So when don't need same thing in a paddle. If you're going to turn, use all the legs and turn a little bit over the kayak and make longer lift paddle. It makes it easier and more power. If you're paddling, you paddle and your body work together. It makes it easier to turning. It's called sculling. If you want to go side size, you want paddle, use your back muscles and shoulders and stomach don't use your too much arm, they get tired easier. You can paddle last longer if you use back and shoulder stomach muscles and speed and distance. If you're upside down, your mind is reversed and it's difficult to paddle. It's upside down. We call this it means paddling upside down.
Maligiaq's kayak is made on the traditional Greenland pattern, a wooden framework with a fabric covering. Traditional kayaks use sealskin, but the fabric cover works fine in the United States. His first maneuver is called inakasanuk, which means to lie a little at the side of the kayak. He supports himself by sculling in a motion called alatsanuk, meaning to wave the paddle or scull it. He keeps his head immersed as much as possible in order to gain buoyancy and keeps the kayak twisted away to keep it from falling over on him. Greenland has steep shorelines which mean that there's no place to land and rest. So a kayaker making a long trip uses a maneuver called nalasarnik, which means to rest by holding the paddle up against the side of the kayak in a shoveling motion so that his inboard hand is pushing up, his outboard hand is pushing down. Although there's no movement, the push is just a pressure. Meanwhile, he keeps the kayak tilted away from him with his legs and hips. With practice, one can discard the paddle and just support themselves by keeping the body immersed. In order to rehearse for a rolling demonstration, the kayaker needs to cool off wearing his hot kayak jacket, so sometimes he sculls on his chest, called pasusanuk, in which he faces the side on which he's going to capsize. This is good practice for capsizing in that direction. It helps get him used to arresting a fall. The standard Greenland roll is the one that the Greenlanders always fall back on when they're tired and need to conserve their energy in coming up. It's a very efficient roll. Here Maligiaq is holding his throwing stick in one hand and holding the paddle in the crook of the elbow. If he capsized with the throwing stick in his hand, he might have to discard it in order to grab the paddle. So by using this roll, he can keep the object he's holding in his hand in position and not lose it. This is his second most popular roll, the reverse sweep, in which the blade is swept forward. It keeps water from getting into the spray apron if he's not wearing a full kayak jacket. Maligiaq's favorite roll is with the paddle held in the normal paddling position, coming up leaning forward. It's a Greenland equivalent to what recreational paddlers call the screw stroke roll. But he must be prepared to capsize when the paddle is in an awkward position, such as in this case behind his neck, and he sweeps with the blade to raise himself. So he's prepared for any type of capsize. Here Maligiaq demonstrates a cross-arm roll. It's very difficult because he's working with his arms crossed in a very awkward position. This maneuver was described by David Krantz in 1767. He observed some Greenlanders rolling and he listed several of the rolls. This one is capsizing backward, keeping the paddle behind him throughout the roll. Another maneuver described by Krantz was the position with the paddle over one's shoulder. This proves that rolling was advanced many centuries ago. If a kayaker lost the use of his arm, he could still roll up by holding the paddle in his armpit. Holding the paddle across his lap, he capsizes and sculls to complete the roll. The same maneuver can be done holding the paddle under the bottom of the kayak. This maneuver was also one of those described by David Krantz in 1767 in his book History of Greenland. Notice that he sculls as he rotates the kayak. In preparation for rolling with the throwing stick in the hand only, Maligiaq puts his paddle under the deck strap so he'll have it within easy reach if anything goes wrong. There are 3 rolls with the throwing stick and 3 rolls done with the hand, which are essentially the same as the throwing stick rolls. He's doing some of them in both directions. With the hand only, he repeats the same movement that he had with the throwing stick. A maneuver that Greenlanders often use is paddling upside down, in which the paddle is slipped under the kayak and then they capsize, and using a back paddling motion they go forward, because when one is upside down the movement is reversed. Sometimes they race in this position. Several kayaks will see who can move the fastest in this position. As Maligiaq comes out of the water, he demonstrates how to move the kayak sidewise using a sculling motion. Then he steadies the kayak, which is quite tippy, by using the paddle as an outrigger. In getting into the kayak, the paddle's held across the lap as one slides in and pulls himself in using the deck straps. To get out of the kayak, they use a reverse movement by holding the paddle across the afterdeck with both hands to make it a unit with the kayak, an outrigger that stabilizes the kayak as he raises himself up on the afterdeck. Then he puts his paddle inside the kayak in order to lift it. For a short distance, he can portage a kayak on one shoulder. If he were going a longer distance, he would have it stern foremost with his head in the cockpit. Maligiaq wanted to try out a recreational kayak. These plastic and fiberglass kayaks are usually wider than the Greenland kayak, and they're more stable, which makes them harder to roll and even makes them difficult to capsize. Recreational kayakers developed rolls that are quite different from the Greenland style. Because of the design of the kayak, which is very wide, one tends to have to move from side to side instead of forward and aft as is shown in the Greenland rolls.
In the old days, people in Greenland, they use a kayak for hunting seals and whales. Kayak they pronounce as kayak. Many people in Greenland in the old day, they killed from seal. Seal put it, he harpoon it, and harpoons getting from seal to kayak, and seal pull the kayak. My great-grandfather in 1929, they killed from kayak, break the back. It doesn't matter in windy and storm, they just has to hunting and go get the food, and they have to learn a roll. If it tip over, it can be roll and safety, but it's very difficult to learn that. And the water is very cold in the winter time. Even in the summertime it's cold too. If you tip over and if you can roll, you might get killed and died. Rolling in the old days, we call it kingusakat. It's mean rolling, and tip over is kingubok. Kayak made from wood. In the old days, used from wood, redwood. We don't have any trees in Greenland. We just have to find it from ocean and made it and cut it. It don't use the nails, iron nails, just wood and string and wooden nails In the old days, it covered from sealskin, probably about 5 sealskin put together and sew it. Now in new days, we use for canvas and painted, and nylon and painted. It's make the easier the new day is hard to keep the sealskin, because has to take care of everything and put some seal oil. If not, they can get dry and broke. So we just use now canvas and nylon. They make the kayak like for little lower than race kayak and drip hunting kayaks. Makes a little lower rolling kayak because it's easy to roll it, and made for hunting is a big and wide because it's possible to use for hunting. And a hunting kayak, they make about 4 fingers as a side, because sometimes they can carry a kayak put in the top of a kayak and behind the kayak and carrying. And sometimes they can carry kayaks over 10 seals behind the kayak and walrus, and not usually in polar bears. You can see the bone they made from whale bone, and the same thing this. And a paddle, most of the time they're wearing a Maligiaq. It's called a spray skirt, and all the name is Dubside. And the rolling, they're wearing from all the way from here to down for kayak. They call Maligiaq kayak jacket. It's made from sealskin, and from arm has to be very tight, and the face has to be very tight, makes face ugly.
In watching rolling and understanding the movement, it's best to view the kayaker from behind. It's very similar to a dance step, in which it's easier to learn a dance step if the student stands behind the instructor as the instructor goes through the step. This enables the observer to identify with the person who's doing the movement, because the observer doesn't have to reverse all the movement in order to understand it. So it's a photographic no-no to show from behind, but it makes it easier. Here's a standard roll as seen from behind, the beginner's version, and then the standard version. The beginner's version has the aft end of the paddle held near the shoulder, and rolling with the crook of the elbow holding the paddle. And the same rolls that were demonstrated holding the paddle behind the neck are done in this position to give a different angle. Rolling with the paddle in the armpit. And across one shoulder. Sculling around with the paddle held across the lap. sculling around with the paddle held under the kayak. The most popular roll among experienced kayakers is with the paddle held in the normal paddling position. Again, the paddle is slipped under the deck strap in preparation for rolling with the throwing stick. From this angle, you can see that the kayak walks across the water because of the flat deck. The walking is very apparent when repetitive rolls are done. Before doing some rolls that can be seen from underwater, Maligiaq warms up by rolling with an Alaska paddle, doing a single-blade roll. In Alaska, only the single-blade paddle was used for rolling. The next roll Maligiaq does is an underwater view of Inakasanuk, the sculling paddle brace. Then he sculls on his chest. And finally, he capsizes in the Nelasunnak roll, the resting paddle brace. The paddle is held as a shovel across his shoulders, and he puts an upward pressure on the inboard hand, a downward pressure on the outboard hand to keep the kayak from turning over on him. Another view of this same maneuver, you can see that he holds his head so that his face is just above water in order to keep his body immersed and gain buoyancy. The kayak's also twisted away with his hips in addition to the pressure of the paddle. Standard roll is seen from behind. A reverse sweep to the left is seen from behind. This is a reverse sweep to the right is seen from behind. Rolling with the paddle held in the crook of the elbow is seen from underwater, and then capsizing with the paddle held behind the back. Notice that Maligiaq comes up very close to the kayak and hardly has to raise himself in order to get up on the deck. Capsizing with the paddle behind the neck and sweeping forward is another popular roll. Rolling with the paddle in the armpit. Behind the neck. The float that's carried on the afterdeck of a Greenland kayak is called a vatak. It can be used for rolling in case a paddle is lost, and in practice they hold it very close to the kayak as they capsize in order to get underwater, and then they sweep it out to get the lift needed to roll. Throwing stick roll can use the hand to grip the throwing stick almost any place on the throwing stick. Usually it's held extended, but quite often experienced paddlers will hold it in the middle. In rolling with the hand only, here Maligiaq fails to come up, but he immediately comes up on the opposite side while he has the momentum of the capsize. Rolling with the elbow completes Maligiaq's demonstration.